The city was still cloaked in darkness when Emily Dawson sat alone at the small, battered kitchen table of her Brooklyn apartment, the bitter scent of burnt coffee curling into the air. Outside, the distant rumble of the subway shook the streets. Awake, but inside the only sound was the soft, steady breathing of her son. Noah, just 4 years old, lay asleep on the faded couch a few feet away, his small body tangled in a threadbare superhero blanket. Even in sleep, he clutched his worn stuffed lion close to his chest, as if it could shield him from the hardships of a world he had yet to fully understand. Emily watched him with a tenderness that bordered on ache, her heart tightening at the innocence stretched out before her. In another life, she might have still been sleeping too, resting up for an important lecture or a finance competition. In another life, she might have been sipping her coffee in a high-rise penthouse, preparing for a bright future carved carefully out of ambition and discipline. But that life had crumbled the moment she saw 2 pink lines on a plastic stick and realized she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. 5 years ago, she had been a rising star at the University of California, Berkeley. Professors spoke of her as if she were a force of nature, destined to reshape financial markets and lead Fortune 500 companies before the ink dried on her diploma. Everything seemed possible, until one fateful night at a charity gala changed her trajectory forever. She hadn't intended to meet him. Alexander Rutherford had been a name she knew, a figure admired from afar, a billionaire CEO who commanded rooms simply by entering them. But at that gala, tucked into a quiet corner away from the clinking glasses and curated smiles, he had been just a man. Not an icon, not a god, just a man with tired eyes and a loneliness he tried to drown in expensive scotch. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the heady feeling of being seen, truly seen by someone so far above her in the world she aspired to conquer. Maybe it was the ache they both carried, the ache of pretending to belong in a world where masks were mandatory. Whatever it was, it had led to a night she couldn't forget no matter how much she tried. By morning he was gone. No note, no promise. Just an empty hotel suite and the faint scent of his cologne lingering like a ghost she could never exorcise. 2 months later, she stood in the fluorescent bathroom of her dormitory, clutching the pregnancy test so tightly her fingers went numb. Panic had been her first response. Despair followed swiftly. She had no family to turn to, no powerful network to support her. Only herself, and now the tiny life growing inside her. The university had been kind, but kind didn't pay for daycare. Kind didn't offer scholarships to students who needed maternity leave. She made the only choice that made sense to her heart, if not her mind. She chose Noah. The decision cost her everything she thought she wanted: her education, her career, her carefully plotted future. She traded power suits and stock portfolios for waitress aprons and late-night cashier shifts, scraping together just enough to survive each month. Yet in every sacrifice, she found something she had never known she was missing. A purpose deeper than ambition. A love so fierce it terrified her. When Noah opened his eyes for the first time, she knew she would never regret her choice, no matter how hard the road ahead would be. Still, there were days, like today, when exhaustion threatened to pull her under. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours, her mind tangled with worries about overdue bills, Noah's upcoming preschool tuition, and the increasingly sharp looks from her supervisor at Rutherford Financial Group. One more late arrival, one more unexplained absence, and she would be replaced by someone younger, faster, less complicated. Emily ran her fingers through her tangled hair and exhaled slowly, willing the fear to loosen its grip on her chest. Today was just another day to survive. Another day to keep moving forward, no matter how heavy her feet felt. A soft whimper pulled her attention back to the couch. Noah stirred, rubbing his eyes with small fists before blinking up at her with a sleepy smile. Her heart cracked open at the sight of him. Her beautiful, stubborn little boy with wild brown curls and eyes too wise for his age. "Morning, Mommy," he murmured. "Good morning, my love," she whispered back, crossing the room to scoop him into her arms. His weight against her chest grounded her, anchored her, reminded her why she fought so hard every single day. As she poured cereal into a cracked bowl and coaxed Noah into his tiny sneakers, her phone buzzed violently against the counter. The screen flashed with the babysitter's name, Samantha, a woman who had been her lifeline on more mornings than she could count. With a sick twist in her gut, Emily answered. "I'm so sorry, Emily." Samantha's voice came rushed, frantic. "I can't make it today. Emergency family situation. I'm really, really sorry." Emily closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. "It's okay," she lied automatically. I hope everything's all right." She ended the call and turned to Noah, who was now trying and failing to tie his shoelaces. There were no other options. No emergency backup plan. No family within driving distance. Her friends had long since faded away, casualties of schedules, too tight to accommodate the endless chaos of single motherhood. For a moment, panic clawed at her throat. If she missed work, she could be fired. If she was fired, they could lose their apartment, their security, everything. No. She straightened her spine, breathing through the fear. Today, Noah would come to work with her. She would find a way to keep him hidden, to make it through the day. Without drawing attention, Emily crouched down beside Noah, tying his shoelaces with quick, practiced hands. He watched her with solemn curiosity, sensing the urgency but too young to understand the stakes. "We're going on an adventure," she told him, forcing a bright smile. "An adventure?" he repeated, his whole face lighting up. "That's right, just you and me, buddy." He grinned, trusting her completely. Guilt twisted deep inside her, but she pushed it down. She gathered their bags, locked the door behind them, and stepped out into the damp grey morning. Rain threatened at the edges of the horizon, the streets already slick from an earlier drizzle. They rode the subway in near silence, crammed between commuters with blank faces and dead eyes, and Emily held Noah close, shielding him as best she could. As the towering glass facade of Rutherford Financial Group loomed into view, Emily steeled herself for the gauntlet ahead. She had survived worse. She could survive this too. But deep inside, she felt the subtle shift of something she couldn't yet name. A quiet tremor in the fabric of her carefully constructed world. Today was not just another day of survival. Today was the beginning of something far bigger than she could possibly imagine. And it all started with the small, trusting hand of her, son wrapped tightly in her own. The marble floors of Rutherford Financial Group gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as Emily Dawson tugged Noah's small hand, weaving carefully through the river of sharply dressed executives. The building loomed around them like a steel cathedral, cold and indifferent to the human struggles unfolding within its walls. Noah's sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished surface, and Emily instinctively tightened her grip, her heart pounding, in rhythm with every hurried step. Her plan was simple: get to her modest corner office, barricade themselves inside, and pray that her little boy's presence would go unnoticed. She knew the rules. Children had no place in the sanctified halls of corporate America, and certainly not here. Not at the towering empire built by one of the world's most powerful billionaires. Emily's palms were already damp with anxiety as they approached the security desk. She flashed her ID badge with a tight smile, her movements brisk, controlled. The guard barely glanced at them, distracted by a phone call, and she seized the moment to usher Noah past without question. The elevator dinged open with a cheerful chime that felt almost mocking. Inside the confined space, Emily knelt in front of Noah, brushing his curls back from his forehead. "You have to be very quiet today, baby," she whispered, her voice urgent but soft. "No running, no loud talking. Just color and read your books, okay?" Noah nodded solemnly, his wide brown eyes reflecting a trust so pure it nearly shattered her resolve. He didn't understand the stakes, the razor-thin line she was walking, but he believed in her completely. And that belief was both her armor and her greatest vulnerability. The elevator doors slid open onto the 12th floor. Emily exhaled a shaky breath and guided Noah down the carpeted hallway toward her office, her heels clicking softly. Most employees were still immersed in their early morning routines, conference calls, coffee runs, last-minute preparations for meetings, and she slipped through the crowd like a shadow, praying to remain invisible. When they reached her small office tucked away near the emergency stairwell, Emily ushered Noah inside and gently closed the door. The space was tiny, barely enough room for her desk and 2 battered chairs, but today it felt like a sanctuary. She set Noah up at the side table with crayons, coloring books, and a snack pack of crackers. "I'll be right here," she said, forcing a smile as she slid behind her computer. Noah nodded again, earnestly opening his coloring book to a blank page. Emily turned to her screen, the endless flood of unread emails pulling her focus, at least for a moment. She didn't see the exact moment Noah grew restless. She didn't hear the soft padding of his sneakers as he slipped quietly out the door. When she finally looked up, the silence struck her first. That awful, paralyzing silence that no parent ever wanted to experience. "Noah?" she called, her voice a strangled whisper. She shot to her feet, knocking over her chair in her rush to the door. The hallway was empty. Panic clamped down on her chest like a vice. Without thinking, She sprinted into the corridor, scanning every direction, praying for a glimpse of her son's bright red backpack or messy curls. She darted down one hallway, then another, calling his name under her breath. Each passing second stretched painfully long, the edges of her vision blurring with fear. Meanwhile, Noah, oblivious to the chaos he had left behind, wandered through the pristine maze of glass-walled conference rooms and mahogany-paneled offices. His small heart beat with excitement at the grand unfamiliar world. To him, it was a castle of wonders, each turn revealing new treasures, sparkling elevators, shining awards mounted on walls, grown-ups speaking in serious, important tones. He was too young to feel intimidated, too young to recognize the weight of power that saturated the air. Rounding a corner too quickly, Noah collided headfirst into a pair of strong, solid legs. He stumbled backward, landing on his bottom with a soft oof. Rubbing his forehead, he looked up, and his mouth formed a perfect O. Before him stood a man who seemed carved from stone and thunder, Alexander Rutherford. The man was an imposing presence even in stillness, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding aura that silenced rooms without effort. His sharply tailored navy suit did little to soften the razor-edged intensity of his silver blue eyes, now focused with slight confusion on the small boy at his feet. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, with the unfathomable logic of a child's heart, Noah's face broke into a luminous grin. "Daddy!" he shouted, his voice ringing out in the cavernous hallway with a clarity that made several heads turn. And before Alexander could react, the little boy lunged forward, rapping, his arms tightly around his leg. The world around them seemed to freeze. Executives paused mid-stride. Phones were lowered. Conversations died. Every eye in the hallway zeroed in on the surreal tableau. Alexander Rutherford, the ruthless, untouchable billionaire, standing rigid while a small boy clung to him and called him daddy with absolute, unfiltered joy. For a long, stunned moment, Alexander said nothing. He looked down at the boy, his expression unreadable, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible scene unfolding before him. There was something achingly familiar about the boy. The tousled brown curls, the tilt of his chin, even the stubborn set of his jaw, but most of all, the eyes. Those eyes, a vivid mirror of his own, stared up at him without fear, without hesitation. "Where's your mother?" Alexander finally asked, his voice low, almost gruff. Before Noah could answer, a frantic voice tore through the suspended moment. "Noah!" Emily's voice cracked with panic as she rounded the corner at full sprint. She skidded to a halt the moment she saw them. Her son latched onto Alexander Rutherford like he belonged there. Time seemed to collapse in on itself. Emily's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, her mind blank with terror and disbelief. She recognized him instantly. Of course she did. How could she ever forget the man whose absence had defined so much of her life? Alexander turned his head slowly, locking eyes with her. His gaze sharpened, narrowing as recognition dawned. Emily felt exposed in a way she hadn't since that terrible morning 5 years ago. As if every secret she had buried, every wall she had painstakingly built, had just been razed to the ground by a single word from the mouth of her child. She hurried forward, disentangling Noah with shaking hands, murmuring apologies she wasn't sure he could even hear. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Rutherford," she said, her voice tight, almost mechanical. "There's been a mistake. He's just confused." Alexander didn't say a word. His eyes bore into her, slicing through every layer of composure she tried desperately to maintain. Emily hugged Noah tightly against her chest, her heart pounding in terror and helplessness. "I'll take him and leave right away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But as she turned to flee, Alexander's voice, low and commanding, halted her in her tracks. "Wait." She froze, her back rigid. "Why?" he said slowly, deliberately. "Did he call me daddy?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut, the world tilting around her. She didn't have an answer that could undo what had just happened. She didn't have an explanation that could erase the truth shining so clearly in her son's face and in Alexander's own blue eyes. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the rising panic and desperate denial, Emily knew this was only the beginning. Emily stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she thought it might break apart. Noah's small body squirmed slightly in her arms, restless, oblivious to the collision of past and present unraveling in the sterile hallway. She could feel Alexander Rutherford's gaze burning into her, sharp and unrelenting, pulling threads of memory she had fought for years to bury. She forced herself to lift her head and meet his eyes. What she saw there unsettled her more than any anger or accusation ever could. There was confusion, yes, shock, but beneath it all, a burgeoning storm of something far more dangerous, suspicion. I said, "Why did he call me Daddy?" Alexander repeated, his voice lower now, roughened by an emotion Emily couldn't name. The words hovered in the air between them, impossibly heavy. Emily tightened her grip on Noah and straightened her spine. She had spent 4 years building a life from nothing but determination and grit. She would not crumble now. Not here. Not in front of the man who had vanished from her life like smoke after one unforgettable night. "He's just a child," she said, injecting a steadiness into her voice that she did not feel. "He doesn't know what he's saying. It's just a mistake." Alexander didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply stared at her, a slow, unsettling realization dawning behind those steel blue eyes. Without another word, he stepped back and gestured toward the nearest office. "In here," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Emily hesitated, panic flashing through her. She could run. She could turn around, push through the elevators, disappear into the labyrinth of New York streets with Noah clinging to her side. But deep down, she knew it would be useless. Alexander Rutherford was not the kind of man to let a mystery walk away from him unanswered. Silently, she followed him into a sleek, glass-walled conference room. The heavy door shut behind them with a muted thud that sounded alarmingly final. Alexander motioned for her to sit. Emily ignored the chair and stood with Noah perched protectively on her hip, her entire body tense and ready to flee at the first sign of threat. For a long moment, he simply watched her, evaluating, measuring. "How old is he?" he asked quietly. Emily's throat tightened. 4. His jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. "And when exactly did you say we met?" "I didn't," she said, her voice tightening. She hated the way her words trembled, hated the vulnerability threading through her chest like a slow poison. Alexander's eyes darkened. "San Francisco," he said, not as a question but as a fact. Emily closed her eyes briefly. There was no point in denying it now. The truth had begun to bleed through every carefully constructed lie. She nodded once. His next words cut through her like a blade. "Is he mine?" The question was so direct, so stark, that for a moment Emily could only stare at him, stunned by the ferocity of it. Of course it had always been a possibility, this confrontation, this demand, but hearing it aloud tore at something deep inside her, something she had spent years locking away. "No," she said, forcing the lie through clenched teeth. "No, he's not." Alexander inhaled sharply, his face unreadable, but Emily saw the flicker of disbelief in his eyes, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're lying," he said with quiet certainty. "I'm not," she insisted, hugging Noah closer. Alexander stepped forward slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Then explain it to me," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Explain why he has my eyes. Explain why he ran straight into my arms and called me Daddy as if it was the most natural thing in the world." Emily shook her head, panic clawing at her chest. "It's just a coincidence. Children say things. You must see hundreds of people every day. He could have mistaken you for anyone." "Don't insult me," Alexander said sharply, the words slicing the air between them. "Don't insult yourself." Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, crumbling faster than she could rebuild. She could almost see the walls closing in, the life she had fought so hard to protect, threatening to collapse around her. He was too smart, too relentless, and somewhere deep down, beneath all the fear and guilt and anger, a small traitorous part of her didn't want to lie anymore. But telling the truth meant giving up the fragile stability she had built. It meant letting Alexander into their lives, into Noah's heart, a heart she couldn't bear to see broken. "I don't need you in his life," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "We've been fine without you." Alexander flinched, as if she had struck him. "Maybe. You don't need me," he said, each word deliberate. "But he does." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off. "I missed 4 years," he said, his voice roughening. "I won't miss any more." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Noah stirred sleepily against her shoulder, murmuring something about dinosaurs and ice cream. The innocence of it shattered Emily's defenses, leaving her raw and exposed. Alexander's gaze softened slightly, and for a brief fleeting moment, Emily glimpsed the man beneath the armor. The man who wasn't just a billionaire, or a CEO, or a name whispered in awe at shareholder meetings. He was a man staring at the possibility of something he hadn't even known he was missing. A son. A family. Before she could process the enormity of what was happening, Alexander spoke again, his voice calm but implacable. "I want a DNA test," he said. "Today." Emily's stomach lurched. "No." His eyes hardened. "You don't get to decide that." "I do," she snapped back, the fire she had buried for so long roaring to life. "He's not a prize to be claimed. He's not a merger you can negotiate." Alexander's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you leave me no choice," he said quietly. "If you won't agree, I'll petition the court." Emily recoiled as if slapped. "I don't want it to come to that," he added, his voice almost gentle. "But I will fight for him, Emily. I'll fight for what's mine." She gripped Noah tighter, feeling the rapid beat of his tiny heart against hers. Alexander took one step closer, his expression fierce, unyielding. "This isn't over," he said, and Emily knew with a bone-deep certainty that he was right. The city's pulse quickened with the rush of a weekday afternoon as Emily Dawson hurried down the crowded sidewalks of Manhattan, Noah's small hand clutched tightly in hers. The grey sky overhead mirrored the storm gathering inside her, the fear that gnawed at her chest refusing to be quieted. She kept glancing over her shoulder irrationally, as though danger might materialize from the swirling crowd. She had been reckless, she realized. Bringing Noah into Rutherford Financial had set off a chain reaction she couldn't control. Alexander's demands echoed relentlessly in her mind. A DNA test, legal battles, the threat of losing the small, fragile world she had built for herself and her son. Every protective instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to erase every trace of herself before he could take Noah away. But fate had a cruel sense of irony. As they approached the entrance to Noah's daycare center, a strange tension prickled across her skin. Something was wrong. The doors were propped open, teachers huddled anxiously in the lobby, and the usual cheerful noise of children's laughter was conspicuously absent. Emily's heart seized. She rushed inside, clutching Noah even tighter, only to be met with panicked glances from the staff. "Miss Dawson," one of the teachers said breathlessly. We need to talk." Emily's blood ran cold. "What happened?" she rasped. The words came out in a jumble of horror. A man had come to pick up Noah earlier, said he was family. The staff member, new, inexperienced, had hesitated but ultimately let him go, trusting the calm authority in the man's voice. But Emily had no family in New York. Her knees buckled. "Noah," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "I'm right here, Mommy," her son said, confused, tugging at her sleeve. Emily scooped him in two, her arms holding him so tightly he squeaked. Relief and terror warred inside her. He was safe, for now. But whoever had tried to take him would surely try again. There was only one person she could turn to. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She didn't hesitate, didn't think. She dialed the number burned into her memory, the one she had sworn never to use unless there was no other choice. Alexander answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" he demanded, his voice already sharpened with urgency. Emily's voice broke. "Someone tried to take Noah. They thought they could just walk in and take him." There was a terrible silence on the line. "I'm on my way," Alexander said, his voice steel. "Stay where you are." She did as he said, pacing the daycare lobby with Noah clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Minutes later, Alexander's black SUV screeched to a halt outside. He emerged from the vehicle, radiating lethal intent, his usual composure stripped away by raw, barely contained fury. When he saw Emily holding Noah, his expression softened, only slightly. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Tell me everything," he ordered. She did, stumbling through the story, her voice trembling. As she spoke, Alexander's face grew colder, harder, until he looked like a man carved from stone. "This wasn't random," he said when she finished. "Someone's trying to get to me." Emily frowned, her confusion deepening. Alexander exhaled sharply. "His name is Nathan Blackwell. He used to run one of the biggest private equity firms in the city. I crushed his company. It was business. He lost everything. And he swore he'd make me pay." Emily stared at him, horror rising. "You think he's coming after Noah?" Alexander nodded grimly. "You're my weakness now, Emily. Both of you. And he knows it." The admission hit Emily like a physical blow. She had tried so hard to keep Noah hidden, protected, safe from the brutal games of the powerful. But by letting Alexander into their lives, even for a moment. She had painted a target on their backs. "We're leaving," Alexander said without hesitation. "You're coming with me. Somewhere safe." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off. "This isn't a negotiation." And for once, she didn't argue. She simply nodded, too exhausted, too scared to do anything else. They drove in tense silence to a private residence Alexander kept on the outskirts of the city, a fortified brownstone hidden behind tall hedges and heavy gates. Inside, it was unexpectedly warm, full of soft leather and sunlight filtering through tall windows. Alexander paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders to his security team. Emily sat stiffly on the couch, Noah curled against her side, sucking his thumb for comfort. She watched Alexander through new eyes. This was not the aloof billionaire she had once encountered. This was a man on fire with fear and rage and something deeper, something achingly human. It scared her how easily he slipped into the role she had denied him for so long. When he finally hung up, he turned to her. "We'll keep him safe," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. Emily wanted to believe him. But even as she nodded, dread coiled tighter inside her, because men like Nathan Blackwell didn't just want revenge. They wanted destruction. They wanted blood. And she had the sinking, horrifying realization that if Blackwell couldn't destroy Alexander's empire, he would settle for tearing apart the only thing Alexander had come to truly care about. Night fell heavily over the city, cloaking the brownstone in darkness. Emily lay awake on the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Alexander's footsteps pacing downstairs. She didn't know when she drifted off, but a scream shattered her from sleep hours later. "Noah!" She bolted, upright, heart hammering, and raced for the stairs. Alexander reached him first. She froze at the bottom of the staircase, unseen, as she watched Alexander kneel beside Noah's small, trembling form. He gathered the boy into his arms without hesitation, murmuring soothing words against his hair. "You're safe, buddy. I've got you. No one's going to hurt you, I promise." Noah hiccuped through his tears and clung to him with desperate, little fingers. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, tears burning her eyes. She had spent so long convincing herself that Alexander Rutherford could never be anything but cold steel and ambition, that he could never be the kind of man Noah needed. But as she watched him cradle her son with such fierce tenderness, she realized how wrong she had been. Alexander hadn't just claimed Noah with words, he had claimed him with his heart, and deep down, Emily knew she couldn't keep running anymore. Not from the truth, not from Alexander, not from the family they were already becoming. Morning crept softly over the city, spilling pale light through the wide windows of the brownstone. Emily Dawson stirred from restless sleep, her body aching with exhaustion she could no longer ignore. Beside her, Noah still slept, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth even in dreams. Downstairs, she could hear the faint murmur of Alexander Rutherford's voice, speaking low into his phone, coordinating security, wrapping invisible layers of protection around them all. He hadn't slept, she realized. Not for a second. For the first time, Emily saw him without the armor of perfection he always wore in public. His hair was tousled, his shirt rumpled, his face shadowed by fatigue. And yet there was a steadiness to him now, a certainty that shook her far more deeply than any of his fortune or power ever could. When she finally joined him, Noah trailing sleepily behind her, Alexander looked up, his gaze softening. Without hesitation, Noah rushed into his arms, pressing his face against his chest with the natural trust only a child could offer. Emily watched them, her heart pulling in so many directions she thought she might come apart entirely. After everything, after the loneliness, the fear, the impossible decisions, this moment should have felt foreign, but it didn't. It felt inevitable. Later that afternoon, once the worst of the danger had been contained and Alexander's security team confirmed that Nathan Blackwell was in police custody, they left the brownstone for the park across the river. Alexander had insisted on it, saying that Noah deserved a day of normalcy, of laughter, of lightness. Emily had agreed, though a part of her still clung to caution like a second skin. The park was alive with color and sound, children's laughter ringing out over the clatter of swings, the scent of roasted nuts and soft pretzels floating through, the breeze. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Emily allowed herself to breathe. She sat on a bench beneath a great sprawling oak, watching as Alexander pushed Noah higher and higher on the swings, both of them laughing without restraint. It was a sight so pure, so disarmingly beautiful, it almost hurt to witness. When Noah finally tired and clambered onto a picnic blanket, devouring a peanut butter sandwich with glee, Alexander settled beside her. For a long while they said nothing, the weight of unspoken words pressing between them. Finally he turned to her, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere, Emily." She swallowed hard, her fingers knotting in her lap. "You don't have to fight anymore. Not against me. Not alone." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the truth etched into every line of his face. He meant it, all of it, not as a promise hastily made or a burden to be shouldered out of guilt, but as a choice, a commitment freely offered, and it terrified her because she had survived so long by believing she couldn't count on anyone, by building walls so high and so thick that not even love could breach them. But Alexander wasn't asking to scale her walls, he was asking her to tear them down, and for the first time in a very long time, Emily wanted to believe she could. As the sun dipped lower, casting the park in a warm golden haze, Alexander shifted, reaching into his jacket pocket. Before she could process what was happening, he was kneeling before her, a small velvet box cradled in his palm. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. He opened the box to reveal a simple, stunning ring that seemed to catch all the light of the setting sun. "I know this is sudden," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know I don't deserve the easy answer. But I can't imagine a future without you. Without Noah. Without us." He paused, searching her face. "I don't want to be a visitor in your life, Emily. I want to be home, your partner, your family." Noah, catching on even without fully understanding, clapped his sticky hands together in delight. "Say yes, Mommy," he cried, his grin wide and toothy. Emily laughed through her tears, the sound broken and beautiful all at once. She had fought so hard to stand on her own, to be enough for Noah, and she had been. But maybe, just maybe, strength didn't mean standing alone. Maybe real strength was letting someone in. Maybe it was choosing love even when it terrified you. Trembling, she reached out and closed her fingers around Alexander's hand. "Yes," she whispered. Alexander's breath shuddered out of him, relief and joy washing across his face in waves. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. And maybe he wouldn't. They married quietly 2 months later, in a small garden ceremony overlooking the Hudson River. There were no paparazzi, no extravagant displays of wealth, just the people who mattered most, standing witness as they promised each other a lifetime. Emily wore a simple dress of flowing white. Alexander wore a navy suit that Noah had insisted needed a superhero cape. And Noah, grinning mischievously, served as the world's proudest ring bearer, marching down the aisle with the rings clutched tightly in his tiny fists. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Noah barreled into them both, wrapping his arms around their legs and laughing with uncontainable glee. Later, as they danced beneath strings of fairy lights and the stars bloomed above them, Emily leaned her head against Alexander's chest and closed her eyes, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. This wasn't the life she had imagined all those years ago at Berkeley, dreaming of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. It was something better, something real. Together they built a home filled with laughter and scraped knees and bedtime stories read in silly voices. Alexander shifted his business, investing heavily in foundations for single mothers and education programs, quietly using his power to create the kind of world he wanted his son to grow up in. He still closed major deals and negotiated ruthless contracts, but he never missed a soccer game, a school recital, or an afternoon ice cream run. He learned how to braid hair, badly but earnestly, and how to comfort a child who woke from nightmares. And Emily, once so certain that her heart was safest locked away, found a new kind of freedom in sharing it, with a man who had become her anchor, and with a boy who had always been her whole world. On the first anniversary of their wedding, they stood together on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, watching the city light up around them. Noah perched on Alexander's shoulders, shrieking with delight as the first firework burst into the sky. Emily slipped her hand into Alexander's, and he squeezed it gently, grounding her once more. She turned her face to the sky, feeling the warmth of their family wrapped around her like a second skin. It hadn't been easy. The road had been long and broken and terrifying, but it had led them here, to a life richer and fuller than anything she had dared to dream, and standing there with the man she loved and the son who had saved her. Emily knew the truth with absolute certainty. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most beautiful endings, and theirs was only just beginning. Emily Dawson's journey was never meant to be easy. from the bright promise of a rising finance star to the overwhelming weight of single motherhood, she faced every storm with quiet resilience and fierce love. Her chance encounter with Alexander Rutherford, once a distant figure of power and influence, brought old wounds back to life, but also opened the door to something she never dared hope for, a real family. Through fear, distrust, and the battle to protect her son, Emily discovered that vulnerability does not equal weakness. It was only when she allowed love to find its place alongside strength that she built the life she and Noah truly deserved. In Alexander, she didn't just find a partner. She found a man willing to fight for the family he never knew he needed. Their story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we belong. The greatest lesson from Emily's story is that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in knowing when to let others in. In our fast-paced, often isolating world, allowing yourself to be loved, to trust, and to build together is the bravest thing you can do. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating more meaningful content just for you.